The National Guard has been called on to fight wildfires, support COVID-19 missions, and deploy overseas. Congress approved last-minute funding for $500 million to reimburse the Guard for expenses related to securing the Capitol following the January 6 attack. Yet the current path is unsustainable. That's according to Nathalie Grogan, a research assistant for the Military Veterans and Society program at the Center for a New American Security. Nathalie, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So what challenges has the National Guard faced in recent years?
So since 9/11, the National Guard units have been deployed overseas more times than at any point since World War II, which has placed an enormous amount of strain both on the institution of the National Guard and the individuals who make up the Guard. In recent years, of course, the past 18 months, on top of the back-to-back overseas deployments, the National Guard has had to step up in regards to the COVID-19 pandemic that hit the U.S. in March of last year. Between 2019 and 2020, there was a 450% increase in mobilization days for the National Guard, which is unprecedented. The missions that the Guard has been undertaking for COVID-19 have included providing testing, providing transportation for vaccines, logistics, and staffing food banks. And that's only the tip of the iceberg for what the Guard has been doing during the pandemic, all of which together have been very, very tough.
And you write that a, quote, fundamental reassessment of the role of the National Guard is required. Why? Isn't their role clear?
The National Guard has two roles. They serve a federal mission when they are called up by the president to respond to emergencies throughout the country, as well as overseas deployments when needed. In addition, they serve the governor when they are called up by the state officials to respond to state emergencies such as wildfires or hurricanes. The problem is that there hasn't been as much of a balance in recent years as there needs to be. The National Guard is being expected to function at the level of the active duty military without the same resources.
And when you say without the same resources, we're talking about they're not being funded properly, they're not being trained properly?
Funding is only part of it. More resources would help part of it, and the emergency funding package by Congress certainly alleviated the immediate urgency. However, the National Guard is giving more money to the Guard would not solve all of the problems because the Guard cannot be in two places at once. When there are emergencies all over the country, they are not able to respond immediately to emergencies that rise in their state. An example is during Hurricane Katrina, 3,000 Louisiana National Guardsmen were deployed to Iraq. And the same thing happened during wildfires in Oregon last year.
So do you see that as the biggest risk here if things don't change, that they're just not where they need to be at the time that they need to be there?
Sure, they're not where they need to be at the time. In addition, back-to-back deployments place an enormous amount of strain on the readiness of the institution when trainings are not able to happen at the appropriate time, when individuals are not able to balance their civilian job and their National Guard duty because, of course, members of the National Guard serve on a part-time basis and so don't have the same capacity for trainings at the same time as the active duty force.
So because of the less training, they're less ready to deploy when they need to deploy. And also, I was surprised, Nathalie, to read that Guard members have gone without pay. How is that even possible?
It's very complicated for the National Guard, especially during the pandemic. There's been an enormous amount of strain financially, both because of all of the missions that the Guard has been required to perform, as the emergency funding measure showed, but also when Guard members are called up, they can sometimes, and in many cases often, lose income either temporarily or permanently from their civilian employer, especially when they are being called up multiple times within the past 18 months.
And you've said that the current path is unsustainable. Tell us what happens if things don't change.
If things don't change, the individuals serving the National Guard and the institution are at risk. On the individual level, food insecurity among National Guard members is at an all-time high. It's at twice the rate of the national average and has increased dramatically since the start of the pandemic. Institutionally, the National Guard needs a fundamental reassessment of its role, especially as back-to-back deployments are what is basing the strain on before COVID. COVID will eventually go away, but the strain on the National Guard internationally and domestically is going to have reverberating effects on readiness, training, and ultimately the security of the nation.
So tell us your recommendations for Congress, for the DoD, in terms of resources and funding, and what do they need to do to change this?
So the National Guard can't be expected to function at the level of the active duty force without the same level of resources. So funding is a really big part of that part of readiness. Additionally, the DoD has an opportunity now to undertake a study of all the mobilizations of the past 20 years for the National Guard and compare their rates, their effectiveness, and the consequences for the National Guard units later on.
All right, well, Nathalie, hopefully things will change, and thank you so much for joining us and being on the program.
Thanks for having me.